Hi everyone and welcome to Facets with Marilu, and today we are joined by Jason, better known as Carnivore JT. He is the driving force behind Savage Carnivore Company with a Bachelor's of Science in Sports Medicine and a Master's of Science in Sports Administration. Carnivore JT brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to the world of health and fitness. As a former collegiate baseball player and Division I baseball coach, Carnivore JT understands the dedication and discipline required to excel in athletics. Transitioning into the realm of strength and conditioning, he honed his skills at the Division I level, shaping elite athletes to reach their peak performance. Carnivore JT's journey into fitness took a transformative turn when he delved into the world of bodybuilding, competing in the men's physique division and gaining invaluable insight into nutrition and training methodologies. But it doesn't stop there. Currently, Carnivore JT has been on the carnivore diet for the past 2 years, and he's experienced profound transformation. He shed 35 pounds, and he's reversed some long-term health issues. I will let him get into that a little bit more. He's also the author of a cookbook called Carnivore's Cookbook, and he's also the host of a podcast called Inner Carnivore Podcast. Welcome, Jason, and thanks so much for being here today and dedicating some time in your busy schedule. I know it's not easy.
I appreciate you having me. Thanks. It's good to be here.
Yeah, thank you. So I know I did quite a big intro, but can you just tell us a little bit about your background? Anything that I may have overlooked?
I mean, that pretty much hit it. I grew up in athletics. I played college athletics. I coached collegiately after I graduated. Realized there was not a whole lot of money in it. It might seem lucrative when you were watching TV and you have Division I football coaches making $10 million a year. But for the rest of the thousands of college coaches, they do not make anything. So I kind of got out of that, got into fitness more specifically, did that for a number of years, realized I wanted to make more money than that, kind of got out of it, and then kind of had life, right? Like got married, had a couple kids, was working long hours, stopped going to the gym. Like I used to be, 2 minutes from the gym, and now I was 20 minutes from the gym. And so I just kind of fell into dad bod, like, for lack of a better term. And finally on an anniversary trip in Vegas, I was like, I don't like this. I don't like the way I feel. I don't like the way I look. I got to change something. My wife had been sending me Paul Saladino videos, and I was like, you know what? She's like, just try it. I was like, all right. Like, what's the worst? I mean, so that's animal based, right? So I'm like, okay, I get to eat fruit and fatty meat and no vegetables. Sweet. And I instantly felt better, like instantly. And so that's what I did for a long period of time. I finally decided, I was like, well, let's see what happens if I just cut the fruit up. I felt great, was having great results. I was like, let's see what happens. And it was just a little bit better. And so I've been carnivore ever since.
That's amazing. Yeah. It's always interesting to hear how people kind of got into like starting the carnivore journey. And for everyone, it starts with I felt better. So I mean that's just evidence in itself that this lifestyle kind of makes a big difference in people's lives. So you mentioned that you did some bodybuilding, and what did your lifestyle kind of look like when you were doing bodybuilding?
So that's what's funny. That's why I make fun of like gym bros and CICO bros so much, because that was me, right? Like to a T. But I still had, and this is what really irritates me when I see stuff on social media. Everybody still had, like, whether we knew it or not, we knew that if we wanted to cut down and get really lean, we had to cut out ultra processed food. Like, that was the first thing you did. Didn't matter who you talked to, didn't matter what their background was, how much experience they had. That was the first thing you did. You cut out the crap. And so you see people on social media now, they're like, oh, I can watch me I just saw one today. I got sent one. And this dude's not in great shape. He's not even in good shape. And he's like, I had a little too much fun. So watch me lose 15 pounds in 6 weeks. And I'm going to eat ice cream every single day just to prove that you can do it. I was like, that, first of all, it doesn't prove anything. Second of all, that's not helping anybody. And third, everybody knows that the type of food you eat matters. And so even if I didn't think that way, I knew that's how you got lean for a show, right? Like you had to get rid of the processed food. Nobody goes into a bodybuilding competition and is halfway successful eating a bunch of junk. Like it's just like that's just like common sense 101. And so, I mean, that was basically I worked at the gym. I worked out all the time. I had super clean diet when I was getting ready for a show. I did, kind of if it fits your macros, but clean, right? And so I would adjust as I was trying to lose more weight, I would lower my carbs, up my fats, keep my protein the same, up the cardio, on and on and on. And so that laid a good foundation for how stuff worked. But the reason I understand where these people are coming from is I could get away with anything. I could literally get away with it based on my genetics, how much I worked out, how much experience I had manipulating calories. I could do whatever I wanted and get the results that I needed, right? Like I could, go out and binge on the weekends. I could have cheat meals all the way up until the last couple of weeks of a show. I could do if it fits your macros where I'm eating literally whatever I want as long as it fits. And you get this skewed idea that that's how it works for everybody. And so then you're really shocked and this is something I experienced when I was in fitness and I was managing a group of trainers. So we have, hundreds of clients, and you'd sit down and talk with trainers and be like, okay, why aren't we getting results? And of course it's always, well, they're not tracking right, or they're not sticking to the plan. Well, or maybe it's the fact that we're putting them on a plan that you use personally and they're not you. So then it all translates. And so then I got out of fitness. I didn't think about it for a while. I got back into carnivore and I'm like, I feel like maybe everything that I've been doing is not the best way to go about it. And so now I continue to hear just the same outdated, regurgitated stuff that honestly was popular 20 years ago. Like, I don't know why we haven't updated our thinking in 20 years. Like, we keep getting fatter, we keep getting sicker. Everything is getting worse, but we're still preaching the same stuff, right? Like, it's just got to eat less and blah, blah, blah. It's just, so that's where I come up with most of my content, because it's like, especially from the CICO Pro standpoint, it's because I was there. Like, that was me. And, people want to talk about confirmation bias and all that. Well, at some point you have to question what you've been doing. And when I started carnivore and things started changing, I was like, maybe I was wrong about this for a while. Like maybe I didn't have the right mindset of how to go about this. And the more I looked into it, the more I did stuff on myself, the more I realized that, yeah, I found something that worked for me. But as far as a general population, what you should tell them, like advice you should give them, it doesn't work.
Yeah, I think what you hit the nail on the head, like I think with regards to a lot of the fitness people out there, it's a one size fits all kind of approach. And it's like that's what the whole calories in, calories out argument is. It's like if you do calories in, calories out, it's a sure way to success and you will lose the weight. But like you said, your genetics is not someone else's and it's completely different. So it's going to make a massive difference when you have other conditions. So if you have PCOS, for example, in women, like that person is going to have a really hard time, with doesn't matter if they follow the calories in, calories out process. Their metabolic state is completely different. And but yeah, so that it's just bizarre to me that people are still in today's day and age, when they're like faced with all these facts and all these things that they're like, you put it in front of them and they still go, yes, but calories in, calories out. And I can imagine how tough it must have been for you to kind of like go from, because you said you were there and you had to do like kind of a lot of digging and a lot of self-reflection to get to this point where you are at now, by going, well, wait, maybe I was wrong. And that's not easy. And I think that's the problem that we're dealing with. It's people don't like to admit they're wrong. Like, I think physically it's just so tough and so hard to say, you know what, maybe you're onto something. Maybe I am wrong, and maybe this is not the best approach. I don't know. What are your kind of thoughts? Why do you think it's so hard for people to kind of make that leap into admitting that maybe their approach isn't the best?
So part of it is like what we've been ingrained with, like that's what's taught. But the irony of the calories in, calories out, so it's rooted in thermodynamics, right? And people love to argue thermodynamics, and people love to argue that I don't know what I'm talking about. And I took a bunch of physics classes as electives because I love physics. I think physics is fascinating. So I over the course of my college tenure, I took 5 elective physics classes. So I've taken a lot of physics. Yeah, I understand, but the problem that you learn in physics very early on is most physics principles are rooted in a vacuum environment. So let's take gravity, for example. The rate of which something falls due to gravity is 9.8 meters per second squared. Okay, so I can take that and I can estimate, based on physics, I can predict how long something is going to take to hit the Earth based on where it's dropped. And weight and mass don't matter, right? That doesn't factor into the category or into the equation. But the problem is once you get out of a vacuum, that no longer becomes applicable because a vacuum doesn't have forces against it like air. And so there's principles in physics. If a very common example, if I shoot a bullet out of a gun, it will stay. The only drop is going to be based on gravity. So I can use where the starting height of that bullet is, the speed at which it goes, and I can tell you how far it's going to go. Cool, that's great, but that doesn't take into account wind resistance. So I can do all these calculations, and from a physics, if I can go to a physics textbook, I can take a physics test, and I'm like, this is how you calculate it, right? Okay, cool, that only works in a vacuum. Now, is it close? Sure. But it's not 100%. And then you realize there's more nuance to it and be like, okay, gravity makes everything fall. Okay, except for a plane that flies, and it's not going to fall until it runs out of fuel. So as long as it maintains a certain speed, it's going to have enough lift. And so you just go on, and then you realize that physics is a groundwork for which to base the natural world upon. And the laws of physics are just these overreaching principles, not equations by which to base your human physiology on. And so this idea of calories in, calories out, first of all, it's rooted in thermodynamics based on steam engines. And people hate hearing that. Oh, it's still applicable. I'm not saying it's not, but when you start looking at the equation of calories in, calories out, which is the conservation of energy, it's based on a steam engine. And why is that important? Because a steam engine is a closed system. And why is a closed system important? Because a closed system does not allow the transfer of mass between systems. Okay, why is that important? Because we're not closed systems. We transfer mass from our outside environment to our inside environment, which means we are not a closed system, which means the equation looks like this is actually like this. There's so many variables that go into it. And so when people try to bring up physics, it's like, okay, you can't destroy energy. All right, that's really the only thing that's applicable here. And so it's calories in, calories out can work. It can be applicable, but just like calculating gravity, the rate at which something's going to fall to gravity, it only works in a vacuum. And so what it doesn't factor in is the complexity of the human body. And the example I use that people hate, they hate it. But I got this from a PhD in bioenergetics, a dude that literally works in a lab. He is a career scientist. He's a professor of graduate level endocrinology, cell biology. It's literally his job. And he used the example of insulin with type 1 diabetics, where a type 1 diabetic can eat as much as they want. And as long as they don't take their insulin shots, they'll lose weight. Like, it's diabulimia. It's considered an eating disorder because a type 1 diabetic will go, I'm going to manipulate my insulin to lose weight. And you're like, okay, so if insulin is the only variable that's changing, that doesn't mean thermodynamics is what's causing my weight gain and weight loss. Now, does thermodynamics still apply? Sure, you're not destroying those calories. Your body's excreting them, getting rid of them, any number of ways. But people take this physics principle that's based on stuff in a vacuum. Like, everything in physics is based on vacuums. Like no wind, no air, no any of this. And they try to apply it to the human body. And you just went from very controlled environment to very uncontrolled environment. And it just doesn't translate straight across.
No, I definitely agree with that. Like you said it so well. We are not a closed system. There are so many variables that are at play when it comes to the human body, and I think it's a little bit ignorant to say that it's only one way and only that way works. And this might be a silly example, but I had this conversation with someone, and I kind of compared it to a light bulb, and I was like saying, well, when we look at a light bulb, we use energy and watts to kind of like watts and lumens to kind of measure the energy and how much how bright the light bulb is. And then you get different types of light bulbs. So the same light bulb is not going to use the same, like different light bulbs use different amounts of energy to produce different amounts of lumens. So I feel like that's a good analogy in the sense of like the human body. Like, we use energy differently. Everyone uses energy differently and not in the same way, because we have things like hormones. So someone that's untrained is gonna massively use energy differently than like me, for example. Like a guy who's untrained is gonna build muscle, and he's gonna use that energy, and he's gonna burn fat. Whereas if I'm just following a standard American diet, I'm just going to gain weight because I've got other hormonal factors that do not favor, that kind of lifestyle. So yeah, that's kind of the analogy that I use, because I feel like that kind of explains it, quite well. Anyway, yeah. So I think, yeah, just back to the light bulb analogy. Like, it may be a silly analogy, but I feel like kind of it's quite relevant to an extent, with regards to like we're saying that we should measure, base our consumption of energy and burning of energy based on heat, when with a light bulb you don't use heat to measure the watts and the lumens, and that's a closed system essentially. And like you said, our body is not a closed system, and there's just too much to consider when it comes to the body. Yeah, I don't know if you kind of agree with that, but
No, it is the problem with the way calories in, calories out is set up is people who are educated, and this is the problem. Like, you have PhDs out here talking about this. They're like, oh yeah, well, the hormones just affect the calories out part. And I'm like, okay, but you don't have any way to measure any of this, right? Nobody's hooked up to indirect calorimetry. So you don't know what your calories in are, because your calories in actually doesn't start until you digest something. So I don't know what I'm digesting. I don't know the bioavailability of what I'm eating. I don't even know if what I'm eating is correct in its caloric value. So like, the FDA has a 20% margin of error, plus or minus. So my 2,000 calories could actually be 2,400, or it could be 1,600. Well, if we're going off of calories in, calories out, that's the difference between gaining a pound and losing a pound. And so it's like per week. And so you can't measure the in correctly. You can't measure the out correctly. Why are we using it? Right? Like, it should be this overreaching principle that we all recognize, but nobody tries to use. It's like gravity, right? Everybody knows that there's a gravitational pull. But guess what the average person isn't concerned with. What the friction due to air is, what the buoyancy of something is, what the density of something is, what, like, where in the earth, where on the earth is the gravitational pull, because it's different closer to the poles. So it's like the average person doesn't care. All they know is if they drop something, it falls to the ground. So that should be the only way we look at CICO, right? The only way we look at it is, yeah, conceptually, as long as my intake is less than my outtake, I'll lose weight. Now, how do I go about that? Okay, now we dive into it. Not this, well, let me show you the math equation, right? If I see one more person pull out a whiteboard and tell me how to lose weight, I'm going to lose my mind.
I can imagine. Oh gosh. Or to build muscle. It's like, oh, only if you do this, guaranteed, you'll get that nice pictorial, display. It is bizarre that, like you said, people don't consider like what's happening inside the body, and like it's not a obsolete thing. It's not a known thing. It's like the measurement is there, yes, but we don't know exactly what we're taking in, and we don't know exactly what we're burning, because we don't know where that energy is being used. Is it being used for muscle gain? Is it being used for, like, where are we gaining the weight? Is it muscle mass? Is it fat? Is it like just fat being stored? I think yeah, I might be going on a tangent there, but it's like, yes, our body's using that energy, but we don't know where it's using it. And I think it's relevant to understand, like, you can't measure exactly. Well, I don't think we have a measure yet that's correct when it comes to when, like, calories in, calories out. I'm just going to use that as an example. Like, I'm not arguing the laws of thermodynamics. I'm just saying I don't think it's a valid measurement for human, weight loss, weight gain.
Yeah, it's almost like if when I decided to do currency, I did the weight of something. Like, oh, I have, and not to be confused like British pounds, it's like I have 30 pounds of money. And you're like, okay, well, what does that mean? Well, I don't know. It's 30 pounds of money. Like, well, you have to be more specific. Like, well, what's the currency? Like, what nation am I in? Where am I trying to go with this? Like, is it dollars? Is it, British pounds? Is it euros? Is it francs? Like, what are we talking about? And the problem with calories is it's a unit of measurement that's not relevant to the human body. Like, we don't eat heat. We don't eat energy. We eat carbon, and there is a byproduct of heat that's generated. So it gives us like some ability to capture. But at the end of the day, it's really only relevant in a bomb calorimeter. Like, if people hear these arguments and they roll their eyes and they're like, oh, blah, blah, blah. It's just the fact of the matter. Like, calories don't mean anything outside of a bomb calorimeter. And yes, it's a measurement of energy. And yes, you can conceptually talk about the calories in, the calories out, and balancing that, but it's not the only form of energy. Like, calories is not synonymous with all energy. Be like, okay, so water in and out. Water in and out is going to affect my weight. They're like, well, fat loss. Okay, well, you don't have a way to measure fat loss. Like, even a DEXA scan has a 3% margin of error. Like, you're just talking in random things that are really only applicable in a vacuum. Like, go put somebody in metabolic ward, hook them up to a whole bunch of stuff. You might have a case there, but this doesn't mean anything, right? Like, well, I lost weight, and they're like, but it's not fat loss. Well, how do you know? Because I know, because it's not possible. Well, what if it's a little bit of both? It's mostly water. Okay, well, the water is attached to glycogen, and glycogen's energy. So, yeah, but see, with fat loss, you have to blah, blah, blah. And then we go into this 3,500 calories for a pound of fat. And okay, that was determined by some dude who took a pound of fat and put it in a bomb calorimeter. Like, none of this is applicable. None of it's applicable outside of a vacuum. Like, you get out of a vacuum, you have different variables, and now all of a sudden there's way more nuance to it. and trying to put it back into the change in weight is based on calories versus, the calories in minus the calories out. It's just, it doesn't work that way.
No. And I mean, this is also where it comes in when people are arguing that, protein calories you get from protein is the same as calories you get from a donut. Like, I mean, that just in itself debunks the whole argument, because those two things do very different things in the body, and they feed very different systems in the body, and they affect hormones very differently. So it's just interesting when people still have, I mean, there's a lot of people, I think I saw a video you did recently on a guy that about the alcohol, where
It
he
was
was
today. Yeah. What?
I
What
was
are you
very
talking about,
confused.
dude? Like, yeah, like for anybody who didn't see the video, he's like, your body can't store calories from alcohol, right? I'm like, but now you're about to tell me that calories, and then he literally said, well, too many calories is what makes you fat, but alcohol is different. And I was like, but you, what? And then the worst part, so this is what I don't understand about social media, at least this isn't necessarily about calories, and people get so upset when you do videos on them. Like, I have people do videos on me all the time. I don't care. I don't watch them. I don't, whatever. Do whatever you want. So this guy has 400,000 followers on Instagram. And he took the time to comment on the post that I made. And he's like, that's an interesting interpretation of what I said. And by interesting, I mean completely wrong. And I was like, how else do I interpret that calories from alcohol cannot be stored as fat? Like, that literally goes against everything that you're talking about of calories in, calories out. What you're saying is I theoretically could eat or consume 10,000 calories of alcohol and not gain weight. And yet you guys freak out when I use the same example and talk about insulin. Like, there's no logical conclusion to it. And again, it all goes back to, well, every study that's ever been done in a controlled, cool, that's a vacuum. Congratulations. You proved nothing in a vacuum. We literally just go back to physics. I will go back to physics all day long. Go drop something in a vacuum, calculate gravity, and then do it in the real world. And guess what? They're not the same.
Yeah, exactly. I was confused because I feel like he tried to make so many points, and it was very disconjointed, because he was talking about alcohol, and then he was talking about pure ethanol, and then it's like, yes, but the alcohol people drink is made of some other things, like potatoes or whatever they're drinking. I don't know what people's poison are, but it's got sugar in it, it's got other things in it. It's not just pure ethanol. People aren't just drinking pure ethanol. Like, it was very confusing to me.
I think the point he was trying to make is that the ethanol that's in alcohol, your body will shut down everything else to take care of that, because it's toxin. It is, right? But you can't say the body cannot store that and then say all calories are the same. You literally just said that they're not. And it literally just proves the point that your body dictates what happens. And if your body recognizes it as a toxin, it's not going to store it as fat, regardless of the amount of calories. It doesn't matter. There's no, like, we are not so simple that your body is like people want it to be a cash register. They're like 1,500 in, 1,200 out, store it. And you're like, but that was alcohol. And they're like, just kidding. Wipe it away. Wait a minute, like, it doesn't, you can't pretend it's all on a calculator and then say that there's exceptions. Like, that's not how, it's literally like, what you're telling me is I can go outside, and if I drop my phone, there's a chance my phone won't fall. If my phone doesn't fall one time my phone doesn't fall, all of a sudden gravity is no longer a natural law of the universe. Like, the moment there's exceptions, it cannot be a natural law. That's the whole point of a natural law, is it happens every time.
Yeah, 100%. But I don't know if you read what he wrote in his. Did you read what he wrote in his post about, like, how
It's like
the reason you're
you
gaining
gain
weight is because
weight is because of the food that you eat and blah blah.
yeah, and you're not getting sleep, and like, yes, alcohol is like disruptor, but he was saying that it's one of the ones that disrupt your sleep the most. One of the stimulants and depressants that disrupt your sleep the most. And I was quite confused by that, because I mean, I work in the drug and alcohol industry in like as a recovery coordinator, and obviously if you're taking some other drugs like GHB and stuff, like that stuff keeps you up all day. So I was very confused by what he was trying to get at, but bless him. I think with regards to that, like, what is your kind of opinion when people go, because we've heard this so many times, like people say trust the science, and like they always, that is their go-to kind of tagline, if you may. Like they'll just say, that's not what the science says. And so what is your kind of opinion with regards to that? And when they say that, well, the science that you're using is wrong.
People, the number one thing that I get frustrated with is people will say facts, scientific fact. And I'm like, that's literally not a thing, right? Like, it's the whole point of science, especially in nutrition and the human body, is we don't know hardly anything. Like, there's so much about metabolism that we have no idea about. There's so much about the gut microbiome that we have no idea about. No clue. We don't even have a good way to test gut microbiome, but diversity. But we don't really know what that means. And so you just think, like, 100 years ago, the science was that cocaine was an effective medicinal product. Maybe not so now. 70 years ago, cigarettes were actually linked to longer. Like, I can actually find you studies where people that smoke live longer. And then you can, like, you're like, wait a minute, what? And then you can, like, dive into it. And it just, there's just such a broad spectrum of stuff that's not settled science. I did a video on smoking. If you tell the average person what happens if you smoke, they'll be like, you get cancer. Okay, well, it's actually not that cut and dry. It's actually, they did a huge study in Australia where, so lung cancer, like really the only time anybody gets lung cancer is when they smoke. So they will tell you that your risk of getting lung cancer from smoking is 3,000%. Geez, that's huge, right? And then you look at, this is where people play with statistics, relative versus absolute risk. You can smoke 30 cigarettes a day, and your absolute risk of getting lung cancer by the time you're 75 years old is like 30%. Which means, right, I can smoke 30 cigarettes a day. What is that, 3 packs a day? I can smoke 3 packs a day from now until the end of my life, and there's a 70% chance I will not get lung cancer. And you're like, but I thought everybody tells you that it causes lung cancer. Well, yeah, sure it does, but it's really not that risky. Like, I'm still dealing in the 70% that I'm not going to get lung cancer. Now, sure, there's other stuff that goes with it, but all in all, people can smoke and not have adverse health effects. Now, am I saying we should smoke? Absolutely not. Is smoking a negative? Sure. Does smoking increase your risk? Absolutely. But we're so convinced of these scientific facts. Smoking causes cancer. Well, except in most of the cases, it doesn't. Okay, so now what? Well, red meat causes cancer, except in 90% of the cases, it doesn't. Well, not having fiber causes cancer, except in like 85% of the cases, it doesn't. And so then you have to look at how we get our studies and how we get our data and realize that we don't have good methods at all. And we're basically just throwing darts in the dark, blindfolded, spun around 50 times, and hoping, that we get a cluster that's all together, that we can come up with some hypothesis. And then the media runs with it and we think it's scientific fact. And so it's just there's no settled or proven science in nutrition or metabolism or human physiology. We don't know. Like, there's a reason you can eat the healthiest diet in the world, have no genetic predisposition, and die from a heart attack at 50. You can eat the worst diet in the world, be 350 pounds, have every genetic predisposition known to man, and live till you're 85. It's not that simple. And people want to make it that simple. They want to say it's fact. Red meat causes cancer. Yeah, except the data on that is super weak, and nobody has been able to isolate red meat in a study. You just can't. You are unable to do so. And until you get people in metabolic wards, start cloning people or have identical twins and lock them up for 20 years, we're never going to know. So the best we can do is guess, make estimations, hypothesis, try and test it, and continue to go that route. But for every study that says something's bad, I can probably find you a study that says it's not bad. Both ways, which we don't use studies that often to support, because most studies suck. They just do.
Dude, I think that's a good way to look at it, and I think people forget that the whole point of science is to learn and evolve, and I think that obviously message framing plays such a crucial role in when we're delivering these findings. And people are very clever on how they use words when they deliver the findings. Like you say, like 3,000% chance of, that increases your risk of getting lung cancer. But then when you're actually looking at the statistics and the data, it's like if you smoke 30 cigarettes a day, it's 30% chance that you will get lung cancer. So it's just, I think people want to hold on to things that are certain because it's scary to deal with things that are not certain. And if they, for them, like science is certain and it's the truth and it's fact, and it's easier to kind of just believe that as opposed to challenging it, because then what is real? Then they get into that kind of like, what is real? What is truth? What is fact? And I think that's a very daunting thing for a lot of people to deal with, when it's just easy that there's a guy in a white coat that tells them don't smoke, don't eat red meat, like you'll get cancer and die. I think it's just easier to believe that when, yeah, I don't think it has necessarily. A lot of people, I think a lot of people are a little bit lazy when it comes to doing their research, and really, but it's that risk averseness that we've got built in, that naturally we don't want to be wrong. Naturally, we don't want to go through that pain, because it is almost physical to the body, even though it's not physical pain. But being wrong has like the same kind of structure in the brain. But yeah, so that's kind of my 2 cents on that. a bit psychology, but
Well, it just goes back. It's true, and I actually said this. I was on a podcast that just aired a couple days ago, where I was like, that's the whole thing about the conspiracy thing is the moment I start looking into it, and if you realize one thing is wrong, like they lied to you about one thing or they covered one thing up, well, now you have to look at all of it. Like you can't take, right? It's like, you trust somebody and then they lie and you're like, well, what can I believe? That's the way it works. So it's easier just to go through my life being like, they wouldn't lie to me. Like there's no reason. Let's ignore the fact that every government in the history of the world has lied to their population about something, but they wouldn't do that, right? Like they don't have, those ill intentions. And they might not have ill intentions, but you start like looking into this enough and you're like, man, maybe we don't really know what we are pretending that we know. And it always changes, right? They always come out with new recommendations. Like, oh, just kidding. Like now the latest one for the FDA is eggs aren't bad. Like eggs are healthy. 2 weeks ago, eggs were unhealthy, but we've decided that they're healthy now. And you're like, no kidding. Like really, who thought? And then, I can find you a doctor who will, and this is the problem, right? You don't know how to determine whether somebody has any clue what they're talking about, regardless of their education. You would think that all doctors would know what they were talking about. That's what we were led to believe. That's what we grew up. Doctors know what they're talking about. I can go find you a doctor that will do a podcast, do a video, and definitively tell somebody that if you eat one egg a day, one egg, your risk of diabetes goes up 81%. And you're like, cool, that's based on a study. That's a real study. That is the conclusion of the study. But to actually have like the slightest bit of common sense and look at that and go, you're telling me that if I eat one egg, I'm going to get diabetes. Like, that is the most absurd thing to believe. And the problem is, when it's that outlandish, the general population goes, of course that's not true. Duh. And you're like, okay, well, then why do you believe that red meat raises my risk of colon cancer by 19% so fiercely? Well, because that's believable to them. And so now science just becomes about what's believable and what's not. Like, all the eggs, that's not believable. Of course that's not true. Well, I feel the same way about the colon cancer and red meat. And they're like, yeah, but that's settled science. And you're like, dude, like, it's just, there's no logical consistency with it. And everybody like wants to trust the experts while also pretending they have some semblance of common sense with it, but they choose what is common sense and what's not.
100%. I mean, I can go onto the NHS website right now, and the first thing they have like this eat well guide, and the first thing on there is eat 5 portions of a variety of fruits and vegetables a day. The second thing, and I kid you not, I'm saying this word for word, it says base meals on potatoes, bread, rice, pasta, or other starchy carbohydrates. That is the second recommendation to being healthy, according to the NHS. And then they say eat some beans, pulses, fish, eggs, meat, and other protein foods. And have some dairy or dairy alternatives, such as soya drinks and yogurts. Choose unsaturated oils and spreads and eat in small amounts. And on there is veg oil. Eat foods high in fat, salt, and sugar less often and in small amounts. And drink 6 to 8 glasses of water a day. That is on the NHS website.
And the problem, when you bring up these guidelines, they're like, well, that's because nobody follows them. Like, that's kind of the whole point of policy, right? Like, if you present a policy and everybody gets worse, it's the cop out, right? Well, it's the back to the trainer analogy, the cop out. Well, they're not following it. It's their fault. Like, or maybe you just have terrible advice, and maybe people realize that doesn't work. And so they're like, why would I follow something that doesn't work? I mean, logically that makes sense, right? It's the financial experts that you watch on CNN or MSNBC, and they go, you should buy this stock. And I buy it and it tanks and I lose money. And then I do that 3 or 4 times and I go, yeah, I'm not going to do that. Why would I do that? And then, some study comes out that says Americans are losing money with their investing. And MSNBC goes, that's because they're not listening to us. Like, duh. You're like, no, maybe we just realized that it doesn't work. And we decided if it doesn't work, why would I restrict myself to that?
Exactly. If it's harming to you as a person, why would you continue? But so many people do it because that's what they know, and they're putting their trust and faith in the wrong people, necessarily. So yeah, it's shocking, and I work with a lot of people that have like women that have like PCOS and stuff like that, and the amount of them that tell me, and I've been in groups where I've seen this, and doctors have just said to them, just lose weight. And I'm sitting there going, wow, that's sound advice, like, if I bet they haven't thought of that, like, getting to that point of losing weight, that's the problem. And then they'll tell them to eat like this. But if you tell that person that has PCOS to eat a carb based diet, Like, can you just imagine what that's going to do? Like, they're just going to be stuck in a rut. They never going to lose weight. Their hormones are going to be all over the show. So yeah, it's just shocking when this is what we're dealing with, and it's supposed to be people that are medically trained, medical professionals, and you have to basically be your own advocate these days when it comes to your health and well-being. I don't know, have you read anything about Dr. Chris Palmer?
I know the name. Is he the one that wrote? No, that's Lufkin. Is he an author?
Yeah, so he's a psychiatrist, and
Okay.
he's basically, his whole book is around, it's more ketogenic diet. It's not necessarily carnivore, but he did a study, a big study in conjunction with some other health professionals across the world. And I think it was based in Australia, where they took like 100 non-hospitalized adults with a diagnosis of schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, or bipolar disorder, and they put them on the ketogenic diet for 14 days, and they compared it to kind of the Australian healthy, what do they call it, the health Australian guide to healthy eating, basically. And in 14 weeks there was like not only improvement in symptoms for these people, but also there was a physical improvement in body weight, their blood works, like the insulin levels, the blood pressure, the liver and kidney function. Like, there was significant improvement. So, and they were like their lipid profiles and stuff. So he basically wrote, like, his whole theory is that metabolism is more than just burning calories, and it's related to weight. It's the process that all living organisms use to convert food into energy, and I think that's such a good way of kind of looking at it, that conversion of food into energy. But yeah, he's really worth like reading his stuff. Like, he knows what he's talking about. And I just think, like, with regards to all the mental health issues that we're facing in today's society, like, there's been a massive spike with regards to that, and there's more and more things coming out between the link between like inflammation and like these disorders, mental health disorders, and especially like dementia and Alzheimer's and that. So it's just interesting when people go, food doesn't matter, and and they don't see that connection between metabolism and the metabolic health and brain health.
Yeah, so I looked up. It's Brain Energy is this book, and I recognize the name because it's on my list. But same thing. I interviewed Dr. Georgia Eid, who's a psychiatry. Yeah, she's amazing. It's the same kind of thing. And then I interviewed Dr. Ben Bickman, who was the professor I was referring to earlier. And you start to look at the connection between all of these things, and you start talking to more and more experts across all these fields: psychiatry, professional PhD scientists, ER surgeons and cardiac surgeons and cardiologists and general practitioner, and just on and on and on and on. And it all comes back to a common thread of insulin resistance. It literally causes everything, right? Diabetes, heart disease, dementia, Alzheimer's, like just on and on and on and on, obesity. And then you go, okay, well, how do we handle that? And you realize it's food. And the problem is there will be experts out there to be like, oh, you just handle insulin, resistance with weight loss. That's it. And you're like, and that's why Ozempic is becoming so popular, because we are so convinced that is the weight is the problem, the driving force of all these issues, when in reality, weight is that's how the symptoms rear their head, right? Insulin resistance, it doesn't really manifest itself. I mean, there's little things that can manifest it, but it doesn't even show up in your blood work in the beginning, unless you have insulin tests, which most people don't do. And so you're like, well, my blood sugar is fine. My blood pressure is fine. My lipid panel is fine. Everything's fine. Right? Okay, well, you're still insulin resistant. Like, congratulations. Like, you're on the fast track to developing some kind of issue. And then when we do find out there's insulin resistance, you go, okay, we'll just lose weight. You're like, well, why don't we address, and guess what address insulin resistance the best? That ketogenic type diet. So it's no wonder we're seeing improvements across all of these things, especially in the brain, by going that route and focusing on insulin as opposed to focusing on the obesity, which isn't working. That's my whole thing about policy. We are so focused on obesity. We've been focused on obesity since the 60s. Right? Like I saw an old Special K commercial where they're like the Special K pinch, and they're like, if you can pinch, your fat on the side, start eating Special K so you can lose weight. We have been obsessed with being overweight and obesity for years, and it is not working. So I don't know. Maybe we should look at it a different way. But the problem is you have people with millions and millions and millions of followers all preaching the same thing. And guess where the majority of people get their information from these days? Social media.
Unfortunately, yeah. Like the amount of times you hear out of someone's mouth, like I'm not on TikTok, but oh, you can learn about ADHD or autism from TikTok. Well, yes, people will go on there and say what their symptoms are, but that doesn't mean that that's your symptoms, or if you have those symptoms that you have the diagnosis. So yeah, it's kind of shocking, and like you said, like I've been saying for a very, very long time that we're trying to crisis manage, and we should stop crisis managing and actually put methods in place to prevent things from happening. So do preventative work rather than just what we're doing, like a knee-jerk reaction about the obesity and saying, oh, we should look at what people are eating and just suggest that they eat more vegetables and fruits, and that will cure obesity and make people lose weight, right? So yeah, especially the NHS is very crisis management orientated. So things have to get really bad before any intervention is put in place, and then it's the same principle where you're going to the doctor and they're saying, oh, you have this because you're just overweight, but I'm overweight because there's something not right internally and we have to fix that. Like the overweight is a symptom of what's going on internally. It's not just, and then there's these other comorbidities like anxiety, depression, all these mental health things, and like some people have comorbidities like heart disease and that kind of stuff, that's blood pressure. And when you put these things in like together, that's kind of like where you get the aha moment of, oh, maybe there's something more beneath the surface and we need to address that, as opposed to just telling that person, oh, all of this is because you're overweight.
Yeah, and I like to use heart disease. It's the same thing. I interviewed Dr. Philip Ovadia. He's a cardiac surgeon. And this is one of the most profound things that I have ever heard from somebody. And he said when he was picking out what his specialty was going to be, he's getting done with residency, he's got to pick out a specialty. And he told his mentor he wanted to do cardiac surgery. And this is early 2000s. And his mentor goes, don't do that, bro. That's a dead field. Like we've solved heart disease. This is when statins are coming out. He's like, we have statins. It's going to fix heart disease. In 10 years, you're not going to have a job. So don't pick that. Luckily, he didn't listen to him because guess what? There are not enough cardiac surgeons in the world right now. And you look at how we're dealing with heart disease. Okay, well, we have this drug. The drug hasn't done anything. Like, I'm sorry. The only thing the drug does is it marginally helps people who have already had a cardiac event, right? when you have not had a cardiac event, it's not really helpful. And then, so now you look at our response to it. One, we just keep prescribing it, even though it's not helping. And two, we just continue to update the guidelines lower and lower and lower, right? LDL, you want LDL under 100 now, which it might even be lower than that. Like there's some cardiologists like, I think we should get it under 50. And you're like, okay, so this is literally a knee-jerk reaction to our diet has gotten worse and worse. Our exercise has gone down and down. Our heart disease is not improving. And you are equating it to LDL levels without looking at anything else. Okay. And not even like one specific LDL. Like there's like 13 subsets of LDL. Like the LDL is not one thing. You are looking at one broad LDL that we originated in a test in the 1960s, and that is what we are basing all of our treatment on. And guess what? It's not working. So your solution is to just keep lowering the guidelines and prescribing more, which is not working. Like it's just, there's, and I get it, it's money, right? Like there's money, there's trillions of dollars involved in these markets. So yeah, it's hard to come out and be like, you know what? We messed up. All of these billions and trillions of dollars that we made, they didn't really help. So we're going to go a different direction. You can't do that, right? Like you can't, like you're so far into it that there's no out anymore, right? So now you have to like try to just blame it on something else. And again, it's right back to the trainer analogy. No, my plan's perfect. They're just not following it. Yeah, I know they said they're eating 1,500 calories, but they're just not tracking properly, or they're not accounting for everything. I know they say they're doing this, but they're really not. Like it's really easy for people to mess that up. So it's their fault. Like my guidelines are good. And if you followed my guidelines, you'd be healthy. You not following them is what's causing these problems.
Yeah, that is exactly it. And it's just mind-boggling, that when there is already such a discrepancy internally that we want to introduce more external chemicals to fix something that's already out of balance, as if that's going to make it better. And I the body is like this whole messenger system, and if one line is broken, or one of the messengers are a little bit on drugs, then the message doesn't come across, and that's when things go out of balance. So if you're introducing more drugs into the system, like that's not going to fix things. That's going to change the baseline, but it's not going to make it better. So how when you're giving someone antidepressants, it it chemically obviously increases their baseline, but that's not natural. So as soon as they stop taking that medication, that baseline drops to below where it was, and they are more depressed and have more anxiety, and they have more mental health issues. So just introducing a drug is not a cure. It's a plaster that you're just like stopping the bleeding for a little bit. But I mean, the ship is still sinking, guys. It's still leaking. It's still taking on water. It's just a temporary solution. So yeah, I definitely agree. Like we should focus more holistically on things. And I find this with a lot of doctors. Like you said, they focus on the LDL specifically, and it's like, well, yeah, but that's also crucial for neurological functioning. So to what point do you want to lower that, until the point where all our cells die? Like it's quite insane. But I don't know, did you see, it was a while ago now, but Stephen Bartlett did a talk with someone, and it was about, I think it was, I can't remember exactly now who it was, but the BBC absolutely dragged him through the trenches, like saying that he's giving misinformation. But it was about diet, and it was kind of, what is your thoughts? I know we touched a little bit on like mainstream media and the narrative they kind of like push and how people tend to follow that. Like, obviously we get that if someone in a lab coat tells us that you need to do this, that's one thing. But that's kind of like the halo effect. But when the mainstream media, do you think that's just because herd mentality, or what kind of would be, what is your thought? What are your thoughts on that?
It, it's a society problem, right? Like, in order to be relevant from social media or anybody, you have to have something that's attention grabbing. And so like we end up, I honestly don't know. I don't know what the solution is. I don't know. I couldn't even tell you what the problem is. But you can just go to everything in life. Find me something. You would think you can go on social media and somebody will go, just to prove people will argue about anything, here's a stick. And then there's 10,000 comments, right? And people will find something to argue about. We think that's funny, right? Like, yeah, it's just people disagreeing. But pick a subject, pick a topic, pick an industry, whatever it is, and I can find you an expert that believes one thing. I can find you an expert that thinks Diet Coke is totally fine. I can find you an expert that thinks Diet Coke is terrible for you. I can find you an economic, like, that think the new presidency is going to destroy the economy, and I can find one that says it's going to be the best thing that ever happened. I can find you a cardiologist that says LDL is the problem, and I can find you a cardiologist that says LDL is not the problem. So what are we supposed to believe? And then you have media that just picks up these, what is going to be clickbait? Like, what is going to get people to click on this link? And the problem is it's gone into scientists, right? So they now present the findings of their study in a way that makes you want to look at it. And then you look at it and you realize, well, it's not really what you pretended that it was, right? Like, so the eggs one, you eat one egg, 81% increase in diabetes. That's the findings. That's in the conclusion. That's in the abstract. That's in the headlines. And then you look at it and you go, well, there was like 50 people affected by this. So you're basing 81% on like 50 people without controlling for the rest of their diet. So what are we like, what are we even talking about? Yeah, I don't care. That's what you're like, the numbers said. That's you presenting this in a way that's clickbait, which is what everything is these days. And like, I understand it. Like, I understand you have to grab people's attention. That's the society problem. If you don't grab somebody's attention, nobody cares. Nobody's going to watch a news outlet that just just talks about boring positive stuff, right? Are you going to turn into a news that's like, in other news today, some young man helped a lady cross the road? People are like, I don't care. I want to know death and destruction, right? I want to know who went on a rampage. I want to know who got sued for this, or who has this scandal, or that's what people want to know. And that's what science has turned into. Scientists have discovered that LDL over 100 is going to kill you. Shoot, I better look into that. And then, well, I mean, in this one study that looked at factors, we found that the people that are on 100 were like this much less likely to die. Well, that doesn't sound good, right? It doesn't sound good to be like, if your LDL is under 100, there's a very slight chance that you probably also have lifestyle factors that are going to make you more susceptible to heart disease. Who's going to click? Like, I'm not going to click on that. Like, okay, that's no kidding. But if I present this, this shock and awe study, that's not necessarily like lying. I'm not lying per se. I'm just embellishing a few things and leaving a few things out. And so that's what it is. And so you have people that get on podcasts, and people, I love podcasts because people take stuff out of context, because a podcast is a conversation, right? It's not a scripted, well-rehearsed presentation, right? So if you take one thing, and I actually had somebody do this. I brought up smoking. I was like, if somebody starts smoking, and I was using an analogy, a sports analogy. And in baseball, we used to say, if somebody can hit standing on their head, let them do it. obviously nobody can hit standing on their head, but it's just a, analogy. Yeah, like it's an extreme analogy to prove a point. And so I said, similar to nutrition, if somebody can smoke 10 packs a day and all of a sudden their cancer goes away, their diabetes go away, their blood work comes back perfect, they lose weight, they get stronger, everything gets better, let them keep smoking, right? Like, now, is that exactly? That's what they did. They're like, you're saying people should smoke. I'm like, please, like, come on. But that's the thing, right? Like, at some point, we have to look at this and go, if it's working, keep doing it. I'm not going to change my diet because you have a couple poorly controlled studies that say I might have an increased risk that doesn't take into account any other factors in my life. And so that's where we're at. And that's what people will do. They're like, well, but the science says you can't say that. That's misinformation because I can go point to these 3 studies that say you're wrong. And then people run with it and it's headlines and everybody wants to click on it and see this Dr. Quack who's spreading misinformation.
100%. But for me, it's also the cognitive dissonance because I recently, so I don't know, do you know Tim the biohacker? Have you seen some of
Sounds
his?
familiar.
Yeah, so he recently done a video, and a lot of the stuff I do agree with because there's a lot of stuff that do interfere with our endocrine system, and he points that out and kind of says, don't use this detergent or whatever because it. But I mean, it's common knowledge, so it's not like some science, like groundbreaking science or anything. But he recently came out and did something with regards to carnivores, saying that carnivores say that you shouldn't eat any fiber, and this is BS. And I commented on his post, and I was like, well, I mean, that's probably not true. I mean, it's worked for so many people. Cutting out fiber has massively improved so many people's lives and health. Like, for example, I can talk about myself. Obviously, I had PCOS, I had hypothyroidism. I really struggled to lose weight. I yeah, I had depression, I had anxiety, I've got PTSD, so obviously that is a massive factor in itself. So the only thing that kind of ticked all the boxes was the carnivore diet, and everything kind of just massively improved. And I was like, so how can you say that people, and it's not just one person that's obviously saying this diet has improved their life for the better, it's multiple people. And I know people go, oh, but it's anecdotal evidence, and I mean, but it's still evidence, it's like what was the change, what was the factor that was the significant factor that was changed, or the variable that was changed? People went on this diet and things improved. So I mean, isn't that all studies to some extent? But yeah, it's really funny. But anyway, so it was really funny because I basically told some guy just to go do some research because what he was saying was it wasn't really lining up. And this Tim guy was like, oh no, we should lead with kindness and empathy. And I was like, I didn't understand why he was saying empathy, because I'm like, what am I supposed to be empathetic about? I mean, you should be empathetic towards my situation of like suffering for all these years and then healing, you know, finally healing, isn't it, but yeah, it was just it's just the cognitive dissonance, because it's like, be kind when it's their narrative, so people they agree with, but if it's anyone else, um it's not okay. So it's a free fall. And I kind of like made the point. So I because someone else said, oh yeah, carnivore, I'm so glad you called this out because carnivore is complete BS. And I tagged and I was like, oh, is this kind, and is this caring and leading with kindness? And he's like, no, this is not a kind comment, but it's not directed at a specific person. And I said to him, yes, but it's directed at an entire group of people.
Here's the fiber thing for me. Every single study on fiber is all about people eating more foods that contain fiber. Guess what happens when you eat foods that have more fiber? You eat less ultra processed foods. Like that's just what it is. So all a study on fiber is showing that people who eat fiber eat less ultra processed food and more whole foods. No kidding, there's health benefits. But also in almost every single study, they'll tell it to you in the study that the people who eat the most fiber are the ones that exercise the most, they smoke the least, they drink the least, they have the healthiest weight. And so people isolate fiber and say, well, fiber is the differentiating factor. Like, no, their lifestyle choices are, right? There's no study on the face of the earth that says fiber in the absence of other carbohydrates is beneficial. Like, if there's no food that I am aware of that we would even remotely think about that's pure fiber. Zero. Nobody's out there gnawing on tree bark, right? So fiber is not what it is. It's the type of food you're eating. Okay, so is there a case to be made that the more whole foods you eat, the healthier you're going to be? Absolutely. Doesn't matter. I don't care what the whole food is. Absolutely. However, just me removing the foods that have fiber in it does not mean I'm going to get less healthy based on your studies, because your studies and the people that eat the least amount of fiber have the worst diets. They're eating ultra processed foods. They're smoking more. They're heavier. They're like all of these things. It's not the fiber. And yeah, fiber helps with all of these things. And you're right. I'm not aware of a single study that says fiber is a negative. But I'm also not aware of a single study that says fiber in the absence of carbohydrates is beneficial whatsoever. So maybe it's not applicable to a carnivore diet when I don't eat carbohydrates. And if I don't eat carbohydrates, I don't need fiber. And it's not going to increase my risk of colon cancer. It's not going to ruin my gut microbiome, because fiber is like a buffer, right? Carbs in the wild have fiber in them for a reason. You need that buffer system. When I just remove all of it, I don't need it anymore, right? Like it's like a carrier for a medication. Like, oh yeah, we use this, this animal capsule and olive oil to help carry this vitamin in the one that you're taking. Okay, well, if I just stop taking the vitamin, do I still need to take the olive oil shot? Like the capsule? Do I need to take a capsule if I'm not doing the vitamin? Well, no. Okay, if I stop eating carbohydrates, I don't need fiber. And that's literally, there's tens of thousands of people who are all reporting everything is better that fiber is supposed to improve without. So it would lead me to believe that it's not the fiber that is causing all of these health benefits. It's that if you're eating carbohydrates, you absolutely need to eat fiber. If you're not eating carbohydrates, you don't need to eat fiber.
Yeah, that is such a good point. And I don't know if it's just people overlooking that fact or people not being aware of that fact, but like you say, it's a buffer. It basically just buffers, that's those spikes in the insulin and controls that. So where they're like, oh yeah, you need fiber to kind of like move things along, but you don't, because people that cut out fiber completely and cut out carbs don't need the fiber to move things along. They drink water and they up their fat. So it's kind of like really counterproductive point that you need this fiber. And you mentioned earlier, like, I know there's a lot of things about, oh yeah, people that eat fiber have a more diverse gut microbiome. Well, great, but what does that mean? Like, is that great? It's like, does that make them better than me? Does that make does that increase their longevity? Have we done that comparison? Have we done that study? No, we haven't. So all you're saying to people are, you have a more diverse gut microbiome if you're eating more fiber, and I feel like that's kind of logical to an extent, like, because there's not as much ultra processed chemicals that's killing off the living organisms in your gut. So that kind of makes it's kind of common sense.
And you're eating a more diverse diet. So it would make sense that your body would have more bacteria to break down these foods. And if I am not eating as diverse of a diet, I don't need as diverse of a gut microbiome. But it all goes back to like, what does the gut microbiome do? And what are the telltale signs that you have a poor gut microbiome? Guess what? If every single thing related to microbiome improves, it's probably safe to assume that my microbiome is doing well.
Yeah. Yeah. If it's thriving, I mean, you know, who
Logic.
knew? No, can't have that. Science facts only. Yeah, so I mean, this is also something that's quite interesting to me, because what people, when we go to genetics and stuff, and what's interesting is like I looked a lot into epigenetics with regards to like adverse childhood experiences and how kind of those things change your epigenetics and mRNA and obviously your brain structure. So, and it kind of led me to like look into like food and how that can affect your epigenetics. And there's plenty of studies, you know, that I won't go like massively into detail, but like there are studies that have shown that if the pregnant mother had, like, for example, a folate deficiency, that would affect neural development. And if the mother had a choline deficiency, that will affect the development of the cerebellum. So the it's just interesting that people think that food has absolutely no effect on, you know, our genetics and what gets carried over. And yes, even genetics of the male has an influence. So if your partner is eating a rubbish diet, your child may be predisposed to following the same patterns, because not all genetics are cleared on like when conception takes place. So, and then the food you're eating can obviously methylate or demethylate certain processes, and that changes your epigenetics. So it's just really interesting when people kind of like push it aside and say, you know, it doesn't really matter what food you're eating. You can eat a donut, you know, it's not going to make a difference. But it actually is going to make a difference.
It's the death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? Yeah, sure. Is one paper cut going to kill you? Probably not. Just like one donut's not going to kill you. But guess what? It's the donut, and then it's the alcohol that you have, and then it's the toxins in your water, and then it's the skincare products, and then it's it just there's 1,000 things. And no, like, it's not the one donut. But the problem is when I tell somebody it's okay that you eat a donut. Okay, well, somebody eats a donut and they're like, but I just had one donut, right? So it's also okay if I eat this one bag of chips, right? It's just one, right? And then it's also okay if I have this one drink. And now I just made concessions on 100 things in my diet because there are 10 million people online saying the dose makes the poison, so it's okay. Well, guess what? If I do a really tiny non-lethal dose of 100 different poisons, it's probably going to have a negative effect, right? And guess what? There's no study, because there's no study that has tested all of these individual ingredients combined. So congratulations, you're not going to die from your Diet Coke. But guess what? It might be if you're eating the Diet Coke and the Red 40 and every other preservative and additive and food coloring and nonsense processed garbage, that it might all add up. So maybe we should just focus on not doing any of it, rather than finding out how much we can consume without a negative effect. Why play with fire like that? How close can I get to this fire without getting burned? Why not just stay away from the fire? Like, it's, yeah.
I mean, I don't know if there was that meme. There's a meme that about the chicken nuggets, about a guy that ate a certain amount of chicken nuggets and he died, and then everyone made a joke about it, saying, "Oh, so that's the
So
limit."
you're saying 49 is the limit? Yep. That's it. That's literally how we
So
approach nutrition right now.
it's ridiculous, you know. It, as a mother, like obviously, like I'm gonna put my mother hat on, but as a mother, like if my eating habits and lifestyle has any effect on my child, like shouldn't I be doing the utmost best, like to my ability, like setting them up for success and, you know, giving them their body the correct tools and creating the correct neural pathways for them that will set them up to succeed and not fail. Like, I think we're very selfish as a species, you know, and when it comes to like people who have children, or like you have to think about someone else, and you really have to think. And it's shocking to me, like when it comes to kids, how bad the diet is. Like, I was looking at some statistics, and I think it said 21% of children in the UK are obese. And the diet is, it's a beige diet, and it's dino nuggets, and it's McCain's chips, and that's what they feed their children. And I get it. I work full time. Outside of work, I do stuff. Like, we're all busy, but at the end of the day, it's what what is a priority, and, you know, is your child's health a priority? I think it's not easy to face those questions, because you have to be very honest with yourself and say, like, you know, I'm not doing my best. And it's never easy to say that. Like, but at the end of the day, like, when you know that what you're eating when that baby's in your belly or whatever, in your womb, um, that's going to affect them for the rest of their life. And it's going to be very, it is able, you are able to change it. You are able to change your epigenetics and stuff. And but that's the whole point of epigenetics. But the thing is, it's not easy. And besides only changing the genetics, but those neural pathways that you're creating, it's like, how addictive is sugar? It's as addictive as cocaine. So it activates the same brain circuits. And, you know, getting someone off that, it's near, it is possible, but it's near impossible. Like, it's very hard, and it's it's unfair.
100%. I agree completely.
Yeah, it's just, it's interesting when we're at the wealth of, you know, we've got this wealth of information, and we've got it at our fingertips. But again, people just go to the person that's shouting the loudest and making the most noise. And it's it's very, very interesting how they think that that person must be right, because they're just making the most noise, and they just saying it the loudest.
Yeah, basically.
Maybe we should scream louder. I don't know. Oh, so just back to kind of the bodybuilding side of things. Like, obviously, I don't know. Are you kind of still dabbling in that, or like, are you more in the coaching side of it now?
Um, I mean, I still structure my workouts like I am, but I don't really have any plans on competing. So it's like I would consider it like a bodybuilding type workouts that I do. That's ultimately like the goal, but I don't really have any aspirations to compete again.
But do you coach people that are currently looking at, like, aspiring bodybuilders, or is that not
To
something?
yes, I do, but not as much as just the typical person that's just trying to get healthy, right? Like that's going to be the majority of the clientele is just the people that are like, hey, I need to lose weight, right? And I'm struggling, I need help. Um, so that's going to be the majority. Every once in a while, you'll get somebody who's like, hey, I want to do bodybuilding. Um, but yeah, the vast majority are just, you know, the average person that's trying to improve their health and lose some weight.
And I think that's actually just a better way of, like, looking at it, is just because everyone goes to a coach or a trainer or a health professional and goes, oh, I want to lose weight. And I think if you that is your goal, like it's great and that could be a goal, but it should be a secondary goal, because it will come secondary to the other things like we mentioned before, like the weight gain, weight loss is a symptom of something else. So if you fix the something else, then that kind of will come naturally. So what would your recommendations be for kind of someone that's starting carnivore and like someone that wants to get into carnivore diet? What's the best way?
You just got to do it, right? So there's two routes. There's you can ease into it, but if you're going to ease into it, you have to have some sort of structured plan, right? Like, hey, I'm going to cut out this, and then a week later I'm going to cut out this, and then a week later I'm going to cut out this. Otherwise, people will just be like, I'm like 70% there. Most people find better to just do it. Just go straight into it, do it for 30 days, do it for 60 days, and see what happens. And if it's beneficial, fantastic. If you need to make some tweaks, okay. But people just got to do it, right? It's the same with anything, right? You just got to jump in. What's the worst that's going to happen? Like nobody dies from eating anything. I could eat Twinkies, nothing but Twinkies for 30 days, and I would survive. I'd probably feel terrible, but I'd survive. So people are so afraid of like symptoms. I'm like, your whole life is a symptom. Like, stop. Your whole life is a symptom. Just do it. That would be my recommendation. Just jump in, do it, give it 30 days, stick to it for 30 days and see what happens.
That is such a good recommendation, because I think a lot of the times people kind of like lack that discipline, and if they don't have that structure, then it's so easy to just fall back onto old habits, because habits are really hard to break, and I don't think anyone, the only way you change your habits is by making adjustments, or by having that epiphany of I need to do something, otherwise I'm gonna die. Sometimes not as drastic, but sometimes it's just like I'm not healthy, things aren't going well, I need to do something. So I think like just ripping off the band-aid is like you said, is the best approach. And then you have a cookbook, so do you want to tell people a little bit more about your cookbook?
Yeah, so the cookbook is not 100% carnivore. It's a little bit mixed in with keto and animal based. But most of the recipes are, hey, add some seasonings. You don't necessarily have to. Uh, it's just a way for people to have variety. Everybody thinks it's so boring, right? Because they see what we eat most of the time. And yeah, I eat boring 95% of the time. That's okay, right? It's okay to eat boring. But people are convinced they won't be able to do it without variety. So it's just a way for people to get some ideas, have, some variations on some foods that they think they'll miss, right? And so, it's gotten great feedback from a lot of people. It's just to give you ideas, right? If I'm struggling and I need a variety and I need to mix it up, here are a few things you can do that make you feel like you're not eating carnivore, and might be the difference between you staying on it and falling off because you just got so bored and sick of eating the same thing every day.
Yeah, and that is such a good approach, because it's that not one size fits all and not a cookie cutter approach, and because everyone's different and everyone comes from different experiences, and that's really great. So how would people kind of reach out to you if they would want to work with you? What's the best way?
Probably the easiest one is just my social medias. I'm Carnivore JT on everything. Twitter, it's carnivore_JT. But luckily, it's not super common. So if you Google Carnivore JT, I'll pop up. My website is theinnercarnivore.com. You can find all of my stuff there too. But yeah, social media is probably the easiest one. I try to get to messages. I get inundated with a lot. But most of the time, I'm able to find like applicable questions and stuff that I can answer fairly easily. So yeah, Carnivore JT will lead you to at least the right path.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, at least you got a unique name, so that's great marketing on that on that front. Yeah, but it was so amazing having you on the show today, and thanks again. Is there any other thoughts that you want to leave the listeners with today?
Even if you don't go carnivore, just cut out processed food. Like that's if you could do one thing to help your health, just cut out processed food. You don't have to go carnivore. You don't have to go keto. You don't just cut out processed food. And what people will find is they cut out processed food, they start feeling better, and they go, I wonder what would happen if I cut this out. I wonder if I'll feel better. Like that's how I ended up. Like little by little, you keep cutting stuff out, and then you're like, man, I feel really good. Why in the heck did I ever do that before? Like that's silly. That's why people don't want to go back. They get used to feeling a certain way, and you realize you don't have to feel crappy. You don't have to be tired. You don't have to have brain fog. You don't have to have aches and pains. And like I'm the poster child. I had my first surgery from sports when I was 16 years old. I've had a shoulder, an elbow, two knees. I have back problems. Like I have to sleep a certain way in bed. Otherwise, my arm, like it's just like I was the poster child. I'd roll out of bed at 21 years old feeling like I got hit by a bus. I don't have it anymore. Like my knees are fine. I'm missing meniscus in both knees and I feel good. Like I feel better than when I was 21. And people are like, oh, yeah. There's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that tell you the same thing. Like start fixing up your diet and you would be amazed at how good you can feel.
That is really good advice, and I think that's amazing to leave the listeners with today. But thanks again, Jason, so much for coming on to the show and making time. I know it's difficult. You're a busy man, so yeah, I do appreciate your time, and I'll link your details in the description below so people know where to find you. But yeah, thanks so much.